I just finished watching Invincible Season 2, and unlike the Season 1 video that we made, this is kind of more fresh in my brain, so I'm excited to talk about it, guys. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review. I'm going to go through the entire plot of Season 2 I don't know what goes on in Season 3, I don't know anything else about it. I'm strictly talking about Season 2 and Season 1, and we're going to get into it in just a second. Before we do, though, I do want to say, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I am your guy with too many YouTube channels. Let's talk about Invincible. So, guys, I loved the season. I thought it was great, and when it opened, I was super confused because I still don't know. I have an idea of what it was because at the end of the season, we have all the alternate dimensions, and we're kind of introduced to that through the character that's escaping my memory right now, the name, but we're opened up to a scene where Mark is actually with Nolan, and he's fighting against Eve, and he's being really disrespectful. He condescending. He was not caring for human life. He was being just like Nolan was where we left off in the last episode. And I was very confused because I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? My idea is because the Viltrumites were forcing him to help people. And like maybe they were hanging Debbie over his head. Maybe they were hanging Eve over his head. Something to that extent. And he just was acting to be not himself. As far as I know, and again, I just finished Season 2. We don't have the answer to what exactly that was, but I do believe that that was an alternate dimension. After that, we're then introduced to the Guardians of the Globe. Immortal has been, Cecil put Immortal to be the leader of the Guardians of the Globe, and we also have is it Angstorm? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Angstorm, we are introduced to him and his own powers, and he appears to be a good guy. He can travel to different dimensions, open up portals between different realms, different dimensions, different alternate timelines, and he intends on helping humanity with his power, studying everything, finding the best of each world, and kind of creating this perfect society free of issues. Now, what's interesting about this is we get right to it because, of course, we have Angstrom, who is really, again, he's hellbent on making the world a better place, and what he does is he kind of makes a whole machine where he kind of infuses the memories and brains with all of the other versions of himself from different dimensions. But of course, everybody in the Guardians of the Globe, Mark, they're all looking at him like, okay, this is a bad guy. We don't know what he's doing. He's opened up portals to different dimensions, and everybody is trying to fight against me. So you're in this situation where Angstrom's like, Mark, you don't know what you're doing right now. I'm just trying to help people. But of course, what he's doing appears to be really bad. And Cecil also told him, like, hey, we need to stop this guy. So they're beating everybody up. They almost beat Mark to death. And now we figure out that at this moment, we think that Angstorm is a good guy because he said, I will not build my utopia off of blood. And he actually ends up disconnecting the helmet himself, which I believe caused the explosion, some energy surge. Yeah, he definitely caused the explosion of himself, but Mark ended up being severely wounded by this. The whole place is destroyed. The alternate version of himself either died or got sent back to the other dimension, but now he's super confused. He has a giant brain. The process that he was putting his brain in was interrupted, and he is having these very conflicting feelings about Mark, who is in other memories. There's so many times where he actually joins Nolan, and that's why I think at the beginning of the series or beginning of the season, we see Mark actually helping Nolan because we're seeing an alternate dimension version of him. Again, I don't know if they ever confirmed that, but that's kind of what I got from it because that's the only thing that makes sense. But now he just vows to have his revenge on Invincible, while Mark just wanted to save the world. This Mark is a good guy, but there are so many other versions of Angstrom who knows Mark to be a bad guy, and I find that very interesting. And I don't know about you guys, but there are so many people nowadays who are tired of the whole multiverse thing, tired of the superheroes kind of going with the story. I love the way they handle it. I thought it was fantastic, especially the fight scene at the end, which we are going to get into because they did. I thought that they handled this story perfectly well so far. We're then brought into a couple different conflicts. You have Mark not wanting to be like his father. You have Debbie kind of struggling with the idea of what Nolan actually became, wasting 20 years of her life. And you also have Eve struggling with her parents. And we're introduced to kind of all these new conflicts. Debbie's a drunk, an angry drunk, understandably so completely. She wasted 20 years of her life, and her father turned out to her husband called her a pet. That is so devastating. It's incredible. And Nolan, sorry, I'm getting the names mixed up a little bit. Mark is so afraid of being like his dad, Nolan, that he's doing everything that Cecil asks. He's working overtime. He's really killing himself. Their relationship with Debbie and Mark is being strained a little bit, but they still really love each other. And you also have Eve, and I don't know if you want to call him a piece of crap dad. I think he kind of is, because you have the whole situation where the parents are struggling. Eve can make anything from anything. She just can shift reality. She can shift atoms. Eve. She can make atoms and make it into anything. Like, for example, she tried to give him gold. Hey, sell this. We know you're struggling. I understand the father's perspective, especially as a new father myself, where it's like, hey, I would hate it if somebody came in and just solved all my issues. Now, I'm not, I don't want to toot my own horn over here, but I'm not struggling. Hopefully, I never will be in that position where I'm struggling. If I was, I wouldn't feel so good. I would still accept it, but I wouldn't feel good about someone coming in and just saving the day. It would make me feel like a weak husband, a weak father, because the ultimate idea of being a good man, a good husband, a good father is providing for your family. So I actually understand where Eve's father is coming from, but he's being really cruel about it. But then again, Eve is being a little bit relentless about it. At the end of the day, they're struggling. They need the help. They should take it, and you shouldn't alienate your daughter. I understand that you're worried about her. I understand that you want to provide, but at the end of the day, he's wrong. He's wrong. He's being rude to Eve. He's being rude to his wife. And so this all of this conflict is just introduced to us, and it's just a little bit of an unfortunate family dynamic in both sides. We're then brought to a little bit of a side story where Mark goes down to Atlantis and kind of marries, doesn't kind of marry anybody. He goes back to, he wants to prove that he's not like Nolan, so this is the beginning of him really disobeying Cecil's orders because Cecil said, hey, leave the kaiju alone, but he goes back to just start saving people. And other than that, Mark does have a different kind of, he does have another fight, but that's pretty much all that was going on in that situation. And we also are introduced to the Martian, who is inspired to be a superhero. We still don't know what's going on with the Martian yet, but those two are kind of at the back of the story. But the big thing that happened in this episode is Angstrom started traveling into alternate dimensions where Mark ends up actually being captured by the GDA, and he ends up figuring out information on how to defeat Mark, his new enemy, new Invincible, somebody who is so pure, so evil, and full of hate, and it's completely understandable, but not every Mark is like that. And I was wondering if that should be something that Angstrom should take into consideration, that this Mark isn't evil. But then again, the Mark that in that reality busted in, destroyed everything that he worked for, and would not sit back and listen to him. So I understand where Angstrom is coming from, but it is still incorrect, just like Eve's father. In the meantime, we're then reintroduced to Alan, who is very, very weirded out with him and his people because a Viltrumite left his post. Nolan left Earth. So he's kind of tasked to kind of investigate the whole thing. He's looking for Mark, and they find out that Mark is completely not with the Viltrumites at all, which apparently is very strange. As far as I know, it's never happened before. I think that's kind of what they were getting at, but Alan does end up getting attacked. He ends up being on life support. Cut that, though, because there is something that's even more interesting that happens, because we have a alien from the planet Thraxa visit Mark and William as one of his childhood dogs that he ended up, the dog toys that ended up throwing out because he wanted to show up and be friendly with Mark. But of course, it just ended up being the creepiest thing in the world. So they end up playing through Mark's heartstrings, which we later find out was like Nolan's idea, which would obviously work because he's like, hey, we need your help on Thraxa. This is a huge issue. I think they were talking about meteors because we knew Mark could handle the meteors. Could be wrong about that, but regardless, Mark goes on this journey. He has a little bit of a strained relationship with Amber because of it. And again, disobeys Cecil's orders. Cecil does not want Mark to go. We don't know why. Understandable that he doesn't want Mark to go, but at the end of the day, he does end up going. And after a very long trip, Mark ends up meeting with his father again. We think that he's there to help, and this is something that I don't know about you guys, but I didn't see that coming, and that was like a really, really nice twist. I didn't know when we were going to see Omni-Man again, but I didn't expect it to be so soon, because now he found Omni-Man. He goes, hello, son, can we talk? And Mark is still punching him. Mark still hates him. He really hates the fact that he called his mom a pet, and that's something that, to be honest with you, I would be hung up on myself. I'd be like, you called mom a pet. What kind of piece of crap are you? You made me kill all these people. It's an unforgivable thing, no matter what he's saying. And we kind of cut from that over to Debbie, because I think it was because they were talking about like, oh my God, how could you call mom a pet? And then we go open to Debbie Struggles, who joins a support group, meets somebody figures out that she was married to Omni-Man, or I don't know if she exactly admitted it, but people are really shaming her for it, and she's just sent into another big spiral of a drunken depression. The point being that Debbie is struggling hard, and honestly, your heart feels really bad for Debbie because she's a good mother. She loved her husband, she cared for her son, she loved her son, and from what she goes on to do, just further proves that she's such a fantastic wife, a fantastic mother, a fantastic woman in general. And I personally, if someone like Debbie was my mother, I would never forgive Nolan for what he did. No matter what his reasoning was, I would never forgive it. We're then brought back to the planet Thraxa because this whole situation just gets even weirder. And I don't know about you guys, but I still didn't see anything like this coming. So We're brought back to a little bit of a flashback with Nolan after his battle with Mark and almost killing him, crying because he actually felt bad for Mark. He loves Mark as his son. He just abandoned Earth completely, and he actually ended up contemplating, can't say that word on YouTube, taking self-deletion. That's what people call it. Self-deletion at a black hole. But then he spotted a Thraxan ship and ended up saving the day. And he just ended up helping everybody and was made to be the new rular of the Thraxans on the planet Thraxa. Everything ended up being okay. But the point being, Nolan was actually in a really bad spot. Doesn't excuse anything he did, of course. He's still a piece of crap for what he did. I don't care who, like, what planet that he's been loyal to. Excuse me. Sorry, I know I just started a little bit in there, but it doesn't matter. No matter what you do, I can still love Earth, and I will never go on and just not care for anything. I don't know about you guys. I'm super weird. Like, if I had to kill a spider earlier, and I really, really hated doing that. I did. I'm just one of those people. Every life is valuable, man. Every life is valuable. So it gets even worse because we're brought back to the present, and Mark is still angry. Mark still hates him. Mark is not really willing to listen to him. And we are introduced to Anissa or Dressa or whatever her name was, Nolan's wife, Nolan's new wife, who is a Thraxan, who is a bug, and Nolan had a baby. Nolan has the audacity to say, hey, Mark, I want you to meet your baby brother. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Mark understandably still lashes out, and Nolan ends up tugging at Mark's heartstrings because there were still issues on the planet and it needed to be defended. Mark ended up giving him 5 minutes to listen and hear him out for the problem. But I don't know what I would do in that situation, man, because Mark is a good person. Like, at the end of the day, people are going to suffer, but you would not want to be near Nolan every little bit. And honestly, if I was in Mark's shoes, I wouldn't trust Nolan. I wouldn't believe him. You lied to him about this planet being, supposedly, about there's some being meteor attack, and you surprised me with a new wife, a new kids, a new married, while his mom is ready to also self-delete herself. Everything that he did is not okay. And if he was telling me that this planet was then having issues, no matter who else was there, because another Thraxan tricked him to coming to this planet, I wouldn't believe anybody. I would take off. That's what I would do. But Mark's a really good person. I'm not saying I'm not a good person, but Mark has a bigger heart than that. He wanted to listen to the issue for about 5 minutes. But in the meantime, the planet's not ready. Mark still doesn't know what's going on, but Viltrumite soldiers come in, 3 of them, and they have this big fight. Mark ends up trying to save Nolan's new wife and his new brother. They end up going back to a cave, and we don't see too much of the fight, but what the wife started telling Mark was, and Mark's such a great guy, man, because he's like, I know this isn't your problem, and I don't remember if he apologized, but he kind of felt bad. He's like, I'm sorry you're stuck in this situation, but she ended up saying that Nolan really, really actually regretted his actions, and he truly loves Mark. I think that got through to him a little bit, but regardless, she ended up being killed, which was it was, for the little time that we knew her, was a very shocking scene to me, or a very heartfelt scene, because I didn't like what I saw over there. But Mark and Nolan end up actually winning the fight. Everything, to some extent, kind of ends up being okay. Nolan's wounded, though, and he's captured and taken back to, well, I said that wrong. They didn't defeat them, but they ended up defending the planet to some extent. Nolan ends up being taken back into the Viltrumites to be executed, and the new Viltrumite comes into Mark and tasks him with Nolan's original mission. He says something to the extent that you need to prepare Earth for the invasion, or we're going to destroy everything that you love. And this is where I was kind of second-guessing myself, because I was like, okay, that makes sense. That's why we saw what we saw at the beginning of the series, but of course we haven't seen that. I still do believe that that was an alternate reality that Big Brain Boy was seeing, but I don't know, because that could be a little bit of a glimpse into the future, because you know shows do that at the beginning, right? They prep us for something. Just like we were prepped to figure out that Omni-Man was a killer. We actually saw that, and then that happened in real time, so I don't know if it's a really good comparison, but this is where I'm confused, because maybe he's just doing his best to have everybody live, because that's something that Mark would do. But he was also being really condescending to Eve, but maybe he needs to act that way. But then again, Nolan was there, but maybe Nolan's not going to get executed. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm stuck on this entire series, but I still do believe that that just was a different reality. Now, guys, for this next part, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, because I haven't been too invested in this yet. We're brought back to Debbie, still struggling. She doesn't want Cecil's help, but Cecil still wants the best for her. And this is actually, throughout the season, I really started respecting Cecil a little bit more, because you can tell that he really, really cares about Debbie and her well-being. And he's always like, no matter how rude she was to him, no matter how she insulted him, he was like, okay, I'm here if you need anything, Debbie. I'm here. Just say the word. And I really have, throughout the season, come to like Cecil in that sense. So she ended up throwing out all Nolan's books, which end up being a little bit more important moving forward. And we're also introduced to Donald, a worker for the GDA, who found evidence of his own death, which we later figure out to see that he was rebuilt, but he ends up going through some mental crisis and ends up stabbing himself, and he figures out that he's just robot. There's blood that comes out, but he is robot, and the knife's tip was completely bent when he stabbed himself. So obviously this dude is robot, but why? Donald then confronts Cecil about the body. He's going through a lot. He's ready to just destroy himself, and Cecil ended up revealing that Donald's brain was saved after he was destroyed, and he was also revealed later on to be destroyed many times over and over again, and Donald wanted his memories erased because he couldn't live with it. But what's funny about it was he was like, oh my god, is everybody having an issue today? Like, but Cecil didn't understand that Donald actually ended up figuring out what was going on with him. So I wasn't too interested in this plot point, to be honest with you, and I don't know where they're going to go with it, because everything that Invincible has done so far, I've thoroughly enjoyed. But I was kind of like, this is the only part that I've been watching it so far. I was like, okay, I get it, Donald, you're struggling. I don't mean to be just disrespectful to his feelings, but then again, it's a fictional character, so who cares? But regardless, we're then brought into something that I shockingly can't really talk about, because it's one really big giant battle. The Martians ended up coming, that big issue where the Shapesmith Martian ended up revealing himself to be a Martian, and everybody's coming here, so they prepare for a big attack, but they end up just having this really big fight. It's a really cool fight scene. It's a great episode. There's just really nothing to break down about that. The only problem is we figured out that Duplicate supposedly died, and Rex ended up getting shot in the head. We don't know what was going to come with that, but they were very, very injured, and the Shrink Girl broke all of her bones trying to explode somebody, but they ended up winning the fight. We're then brought back to Alan, who is still on life support. Somebody was supposedly killing him, but then it didn't end up killing him, so we don't know if it actually helped him, but we figure out that Alan is bigger, he's stronger, he is just as strong as a Viltrumite, so he's then tasked to go get Mark and see what everything's going on over here, see if he can kind of talk to Nolan. I don't really know what the plan is, but the point is to recruit Mark, figure out what's going on with Mark. After the big fight, we're then cut to Debbie, who is now has this big problem with Mark, because Mark brought home Nolan's baby brother and explained the entire situation to her. A lot to handle, but because Debbie is such a fantastic, amazing person, she doesn't let Nolan get in the way of caring for this new baby. She wants it. She's decided to keep it. She has all the experience in the world, and she still doesn't like Cecil, but she ends up accepting help from Cecil again, which, again, W Cecil, we love Cecil over here. I'm going to be so disappointed, by the way, if it turns out in, like, season 3 or, like, further down the road that Cecil ends up being a very bad guy who had everybody, he had it out for everybody at the beginning, especially Debbie. That's going to be so heartbreaking if that's the case, because, again, I'm still really liking Cecil. He is taking all of the punishment, just wants what's best from the world, seemingly, right? For some reason, I don't trust him completely, but I do like him. So she ends up raising Oliver. We find out that Oliver is half Viltrumite, half Thraxan, so he's still going to live a long time, but he ages super quick. He grows every single episode. So we have a nanny taking care of him. We have Debbie taking care of everybody. And in the meantime, Mark and Amber's relationship really, really ends up struggling, because Mark has to save lives, and Amber has to let him save lives, because she's like, okay, Mark, no, don't save people. Come hang out with me. That's a big problem, right? Then you're potentially risking people's lives, but it's really tough, because I just don't think the relationship can work out. You would need Mark to, which I do believe he's going to end up in a relationship with Eve one day. You would need them both to be superheroes. That's how the relationship would work. Someone like Invincible can't be in a relationship with a human girl like that. It just wouldn't work, and both of them understandably have their own issues with each other and the relationship, so they really have nothing to talk about. They barely spend time with each other. Every single time that they end up spending time together, Mark has to take off. You signed up for it, so do you really have a right in being upset about it? No, but yes at the same time, because how could you not be upset about that, So both of them aren't angry at each other. They're kind of angry with themselves. It's just an incompatible relationship that I don't know if it actually, ended for sure. I think it did, but I guess we'll find out for sure in the next season, right? Throughout this time as well, it really seems like Eve is starting to develop develop an interest in Mark. And again, I think that the story is going to go about Mark and Eve are going to be together forever, and that's going to be the true relationship that they've always wanted, because they're a little touchy. They hug each other, they kind of enjoy being around each other. But regardless, we are also brought into after the squid attack, because that already happened. The squid ended up taking over the Martian again. Nothing came from that as of right now, but the squids aren't completely over with yet. But in the meantime, we also figure out that the suit guy did have a bunch of Nolan's novels. He's like, oh, Nolan always used to write. They weren't that great, but then Mark ended up reading them because Nolan, the final thing that he said to Mark was, read my books. So that meant something. Mark was scouring through them, but what happened was, it's just these crazy situations. Like one that they went into was the effect that gravity can have on a Viltrumite, and he believes that this is the expressing and documenting all of the weaknesses of the Viltrumites, because it seems like that they're just completely untouchable, right? Especially for someone like Nolan's and someone that Mark is becoming to be. They're seemingly untouchable, but gravity and a little bit more things seems to be effect, because Nolan ended up writing so many different novels. Alan ends up coming back to talk to Mark, and he won't go back with Alan, but he's really happy because he can just scan the books and then take that information back, because it seems like there's going to be an uproar against the Viltrumite Empire. So this is where I'm confused about it, because if Nolan was writing those books, did he plan on leaving the Viltrumite Empire this entire time? Did he already love Mark and Debbie? He just had to put on an act? I don't know. I don't really think so, because later on we figure out that Nolan is having an issue with himself, because he's like, I miss my wife, and that's something that we're going to get into, which is crazy, by the way. So I don't want to know why Nolan would write those books. If he's planning on taking over Earth, why would he want that information out there, right? Unless he was planning on fixing it himself, but that's a really poor excuse to write the books, to be honest with you. But regardless, after that, we're then reintroduced to Angstrom, who ends up returning to Earth with Mark in it. We're then brought into a little bit of a side story with Reeti becoming the Guardians leader again. The Immortal's going on a leave because he couldn't take the fact that Duplicate died, right? So other than that, Donald figures out that he has died like a bunch of times, and he wanted his own memories erased, and Cecil ended up telling him about that. But he then goes on to, because the same thing happened to Rick, right? He was rebuilt, and Rick wanted to self-delete, but he kind of figures out who he is and doesn't want his memories erased again, which he already decided that he was going to do again, but he kind of called it off because he helped Rick out, because it's the same thing. So I think that Donald kind of fixed himself. I don't really see the point of this still, because it doesn't really affect the overall story. So I feel like that we're going to see more with Donald. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not that interested in it personally. But we're then brought into the Viltrumites actually coming back to Earth, because there's a Viltrumite named Anissa who interrupts Mark and Amber, who he just had to leave after leaving her at Comic-Con or comic book convention, some Comic-Con type thing. He left her in a big line, and they ended up being okay about it. They ended up having dinner. Mark wanted to get rid of his earpieces. I think that's what he did, but regardless, that's besides the point. She ends up grabbing Amber behind the neck and was like, "You're going to talk to me right now, Mark, or she's going to die." Amber is completely destroyed internally by it, because apparently the force of the grip was something like she could never experience before. Like the bones were going to break like in just a second, right? So Mark ends up meeting her in the sky. She tries to remind him of his mission. That's what I was kind of curious about, because we didn't hear about that mission again. Maybe he forgot about it because it was been beating to death so much. I was kind of wondering when this would come up again. But Mark just straight up doesn't care. He's like, I'm never going to join you. They end up fighting. He's completely 100% overpowered. She takes out a kaiju. She claims that she just wants the best for Earth, and it's kind of like a Thanos type thing, right? Where it's like, okay, what you're saying is understandable, but at the end of the day, you can't just go around killing the weak. Everybody's life is precious, right? Not everybody's, but you get the point. Like, my point being bad people. Bad people. Their life is not precious, okay? For example, what Angstrom is going to end up doing right after this. So, she ends up not killing Mark after just beating him to death again. The amount of times I've seen Mark so bloody is insane. But Amber is completely destroyed on the inside, doesn't know what to do. She's crying because she could have died in that moment. She almost died, and Mark took forever to come back, because the first thing she said was, "Please come back to me." And it took him a very long time. He got beaten to death, and it's a little bit more straining on the relationship, I would say. Well, not even I would say. But before we continue on with the relationship between Mark and Amber, Alan is confronted by some more Viltrumites, and he ends up being captured. He ends up like just figuring out how powerful he actually is. Like, oh my god, that doesn't hurt me. And he ends up, okay, maybe because Mark ended up asking Alan to figure out what's going on with Nolan, because he assumed Nolan would be on that ship. He allowed himself to get captured. We're going to have a conversation with that soon, but in the meantime, this is where the breakup happens, and I think they broke up. I think because they're crying about the situation. Is this going to happen over and over? I can't be in your world. Amber said, I can't live in your world, Mark, and Mark can't live in hers, and it's just A long time coming. I'm pretty sure they're broken up because there's another scene in the season where Mark kind of just watches over her. But after breaking up, Mark receives a call by Angstrom. Asks when you're coming home, and he has Oliver and Debbie ready to be killed. We now reach the climax of the season where Mark confronts Angstrom. He gets home in just a second, and he doesn't know what this guy's power is, but of course, he is really like, okay, what are you doing with Debbie, or excuse me, my mother and my brother? What are you doing? And he goes to attack Angstrom, and Angstrom kind of tries to talk to him, but he starts sending him across different multiverses, and he chooses when Mark comes back because he could just straight up leave him there, right? And we see Mark just visiting Batman, Spider-Man. It's all these really cool things. And you know what's funny too is he ended up after, I'm jumping the gun just a little bit over here, but if you guys don't know, if you're new to this channel and you didn't come from any other channel, I am really, really big in the Fortnite community. And when they first initially collabed with Invincible, people were going crazy because apparently there was some relation to Fortnite in Invincible, and it was crazy because I didn't know what actually was going to come. Mark came out with the Dragon's Breath Sniper from one portal from Fortnite. We didn't see him go into the Fortnite realm, but he came out with the Dragon's Breath Sniper and just smacked it across his face. So I thought that was really cool. Took me out of the moment a little bit because I was like, oh, there it is. That's what everybody was talking about, right? But still took me out of the moment a little bit. But while Mark's traveling through dimensions and kind of being tortured, he's getting angry, and really, he's getting even more angry. Debbie ends up attacking him. I don't remember if she threw something at him or smacked him or whatever, but he's just, her arm. It was horrible. Oliver's crying, and Debbie, like the goat that she is still sitting here like her arm like this, like just completely broken the bones out. And she's like, Oliver, baby, it's okay. It's okay. Debbie is probably the greatest person in this entire series. And I don't even know if Mark is, but after traveling through reality, and I gotta say, I loved it all. It was very tearing on the heartstrings. Like, it was very well crafted, the way they told the story, the way that it was acted, the way that it was presented, the way it was animated. I loved it all. But after so long, Mark ended up getting a hold of Angstrom, who said that he wants to make him suffer. He's convinced that Mark is a real bad guy, and Mark's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I may have joined my father in other dimensions, but I'm not bad guy. I'm not a bad guy. I didn't do anything bad. I'm a good person. He saw what he did to Debbie, got a hold of him, and beat him to death. And Mark just could not live with that because it's his first official kill of a person. He just beat him to death, and he was worried about actually becoming like his father. He's full of blood, and I gotta say, who cares? Who cares? Looks good on Angstrom. That guy is better off dead. I know that he wanted to just help the world initially, but no good person does what he did to a mother and a child. Even, let's say, if Invincible was evil, you don't know anything about his mother. You don't know anything about that little baby, by the way. That guy deserved to die, and I'm glad Mark did what he did. So Mark is struggling to live with it. Mark is also stuck in a dimension because Angstrom was the only way that he could get out of that dimension. So he's walking around all distraught, completely in blood. He's really thinking that he became his father. He's worried about that, but in reality, he did the perfect thing. That was awesome to do. He needs to figure out how to get home, but then the Guardians of the Globe all come out, and they're all old. They're all old. Time travels, time passes differently. So the world went on for, I don't know what it was. Like, let's say it was 30 years. Regardless, it was a significant amount of time. It was many years. They were all old. Mark figures out that's like, hey, I literally just killed this guy, and then Robot ended up telling him like, hey, well, you know, it's been this amount of time for us, and he's like completely distraught. And what the Guardian said, what Robot said to Eve was, don't disrupt the timeline. But what does Eve do? The right thing, and disrupts the timeline. Because before Mark ended up going home, he was still all distraught by what he just did. She said to him, I've loved you. I love you, and I've always loved you. I need you to tell me that. I didn't have the heart to tell you. And Mark is kind of taken back by it because, of course, he literally just supposedly ended his relationship with Amber. Or it's on its very last leg if it's not. And I was like, okay, yeah, you know, that makes sense. He's going to break up with Amber, or they are broken up. He's going to go to Eve. They're going to love each other. So she says, I don't care if you love me back. Just tell me so I'm not hanging on it. And of course, this resets everything. And the world goes on how it's supposed to go on, I guess. And Mark is brought back to the original timeline because where he didn't disappear. So he's brought back to where he actually left, and it's just in real time. Debbie's still there. Debbie's okay. Cecil took care of everything. In the meantime, though, they were then brought into the Immortal, who I just remembered now quit or was put on temporary leave by Cecil. But regardless, he's in his own little cabin, and Duplicate comes out, who was supposedly dead. They have this beautiful moment together, which is crazy because they barely had any screen time yet. It's this really beautiful moment of them just hugging each other. I loved seeing it. But anyways, there was another scene where A tomb gets uncovered. I'm sure that's going to take place in season 3 for somehow, but Mark ends up going to visit Eve. And this is like, okay, they're going to kiss on a bridge. It's going to be this beautiful romantic moment, but he doesn't tell her. He doesn't tell her, and it's very frustrating as a viewer because, of course, we just saw Eve, don't leave me hanging. Tell me yes or no. I'm hoping Mark is just thinking about it. I would imagine that they're going to end up together. I would imagine it seems like the right thing to do, but maybe Mark is fresh off of a breakup. And he also, this is where I think they are broken up because he goes and flies over Amber and is just watching her who's talking with her friends. And Amber kind of looks back like Mark is kind of in disguise, kind of like a cliche thing they just did, but Mark didn't talk to her, so I'm guessing they're broken up. But he didn't tell Eve. He didn't admit to anything. But then we're brought back to the prison. We're brought back to the prison where Alan allowed himself to get captured, and he starts telepathically communicating with Nolan. And what's crazy is Nolan isn't feeling like himself. He's accepting his fate, and he feels a little bit off. Why does he feel off? He misses his wife. Or what he said is, I think I miss my wife. So it seems like he's surprised by that. And that's where the season ended. And I'm like, oh my God, is Alan going to break him out and he's going to try to go visit Debbie again and say that I've always loved you? This is where I'm confused because Nolan obviously loves Mark and Debbie is a pet, but I'm so confused by his true motives. Like, is that what he actually believed? I don't know. But then there's things like this where it's like, I think I miss my wife. Like, what the heck's going on? I miss my wife. I never cared for her. So maybe he didn't care for her. It's just super confusing and I can't wait to see how it actually ends up. So if I had to guess, what's going to come is whatever came out of that tomb is going to be an issue. The squids are going to come back. And I think Amber and Mark are broke up. He's going to end up being with Eve. They're going to live happily ever after. And Nolan's going to come back down, fight against the Viltrumites, and he's going to try to reconnect with Mark and Debbie. And for some reason, I think that he's going to succeed in that. Obviously not the beginning. Maybe he'll just have this big moment where he has this big heroic moment and ends up defeating all of the Viltrumites as they come to attack Earth. And then he ends up loving Debbie and Mark, and that's where the series comes to a close. I don't know if they're still making seasons. I don't know how many episodes are out, but I cannot wait for season 3. It was fantastic. This show's a 10 out of 10 so far. I'm really enjoying it. So guys, please don't spoil this for me in the comment section down below. I'm very excited to watch season 3. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you very, very much for watching the video. If you were interested, if you haven't seen it already, check out this video on screen over here. At the top, you will see my review for Invincible Season 1, but at the bottom, YouTube thinks you'll like this video the best. So check it out, guys. We have lots of content over here on the channel. I will see you over there or in the next video. Take care.